English 111. It's Miss Brewer here. I did not expect that I was going to make this video today, so I apologize for this. But I wanted to make my response video for week one's poems earlier rather than later. So you got some vital feedback in regard to the posts that are being made before you involved yourself in the discussion forum for week two's poetry. So each week after you guys participate in the forum, I won't be super active in the forum during the week. I may make some suggestions here and there, but I won't be like super duper active, mostly because I don't want what I'm saying to color your reactions and responses and interactions with one another. So you won't really hear my feedback on the poetry and on the discussion forum until it's over, with the exception of, I do go in and look at what's happening, and if I think you need to add more or something like that, I'll try to give you that heads up, or I did the first week at least, to be sure that you understand what the expectations are for the discussion forums and for your posts. So I'm going to give just some notes that I made while I was doing the grading. First, I'm going to talk about just making the posts in general, and then I'll actually talk about the poems themselves a little, okay? So first thing I want to say in regard to the posts is about how I'm grading them, and there is information about this in Moodle. So please go to the note about discussion forum grading, where I very much go over this, and I think I went over it in my first video for the class. You've got to meet the word count minimum every time. That's super important, guys, in grading. The only way people really lost points is if this week especially, is if you did not meet the minimums, if you were not propelling the conversations forward, and if it was late. Okay, so remember that your initial response is due on Thursday, and I can see kind of who responds and when they respond. So if you're doing your initial response on Sunday, you're losing points on your initial response because it's late and no one can really engage with that. Okay, so that's why the due date is on Thursdays. And then of course the substance of the post is also where you can lose points. If it doesn't meet the word count requirement, if it's not really referring to the literature, okay, in your initial response especially. And then in your replies, if you write one sentence, that's not going to get full credit, okay? That's not even going to get half credit. The minimum there is expected to be about 150 words. Now, if it's a little shy, that's okay if you're making a point and you're propelling the conversation forward. When I say a little shy, I mean like 5-10 words, okay? Some of the replies that I was getting were under 100 words, some were under 50 words. So that's just not an acceptable reply. And I did go over that in the beginning of the course. So make sure you're meeting those expectations. While I like it when we, relate the poems to our own experiences, do remember that you still need to be talking about the poems in addition to that, okay? So if you say, I experienced this, then you need to go back to that literature and say, and here's where the author addressed it. That's super important, okay? What other notes do I have about your posts? Let's see. Yeah, so I just said initial posts should be detailed and should be about the week that's indicated, okay? So in week 2, we talked about week 1's poems. Some of you guys talked about week 2's poems. That wasn't the assignment. The assignment was week 1's poem, and it's actually in the assignment title. So, and I went over it in detail in my video lecture, so make sure you're watching those completely. Be sure that you use lines from the poetry in your initial response for sure. And then if you want to do it in your replies too, that's fine. But you should be quoting the literature. And this is going to help you when you go on to write your literary analysis, because you can go back to these forums and kind of look for things that stood out to you and pull those lines when you need to quote things. Poem punctuation. Guys, I addressed this already, but poems are punctuated with quotation marks around them. So make sure we're punctuating those correctly. Themes are not one word. So a theme statement or a theme topic can be one word, but you guys are writing a theme statement, so it should be a sentence, and it should be what the author is saying essentially about society, okay? Late posts will lose points. You need to, basic grammar expectations, I expect you to read over your post before you submit it. Make sure you're capitalizing I, okay? You're a proper noun. always remember the lens through which we're reading the poems, which is with the social issues in mind, okay? The more that you do that and read in that lens, the easier time you're gonna have later on when it comes to narrowing down social issues and making connections and things like that. When you say things like the author painted a clear picture, or the author is saying this, do make sure that you pull how the author did that. So pull some lines that show how the author created that picture for you. I think that's, oh, if you have outside sources, you have to cite them. A full citation is required and an in-text citation for the outside sources. I'm not being super picky about you citing the poems because we're all reading the same poems. So in your discussion forums, I'm not being super picky about that. But if you have an outside source, you have to cite it. Otherwise, it's plagiarism. And then the last thing I want to say in regard to your replies, it's not your responsibility to judge how good someone's response is, okay? I will go in if I feel the need to and make a comment. So I don't want to see, you know, I think you should have more content here, or hey, great job. That's not your responsibility. You're replying to the post to give another perspective, to ask a question, to give a different example, you know, those types of things. All right. Quick notes on some of the poems that you guys talked about. A lot of you guys talked about, wait, let me go back. Poems. You guys should not be skimming these poems. You should be reading them all in their entirety, taking notes. Whether or not you're talking about them or not, you should be reading all of the poems. And definitely you should not be replying if you did not read the poem. That's crazy. You should not, you definitely should not be advertising also that you're not reading the poems. That's not a good idea either. Okay, and that's all I wanted to say. Yeah, so don't skim them. You need to read them all, okay? And make sure you're utilizing the PowerPoint that I provided to help you with reading them. And and no skimming. Okay, so talking about the Barefoot Boy first, because a lot of you guys talked about that one. And a lot of you guys talked about finding innocence in the bare feet and in nature and in youth. And that's all very transcendentalist. I don't know if you guys are aware of that writing movement, transcendentalism, Henry Thoreau and Emerson and things like that. They're some of my favorite authors. But think about it when you're reading about that, like what connections to social issues can you make to that today, okay? So the innocence that's found in nature or the ability to be barefoot, what social issues can you connect those things that are standing out to you today, okay? And then a lot of you guys talked about I Look at the World by Hughes, and one of the things that really stood out to me, and I responded to it, but this is for everybody. So in my English 111 IN class, I think it was Jakara. Is it Jakara? Let me see. And I hope I pronounced your name correctly. Yeah, Jakara. Talked about Spike Lee's Do the Right Thing, which was so crazy because I literally watched that movie like 2 days before I read your response for the first time. And what's even crazier is just how relevant that film became after everything that's happened in Minneapolis. So he talked about Spike Lee's Do the Right Thing, which is a film that was made in 1989, over 30 years ago. And yet here we are still talking about it and that relevance. And that's the point of reading these poems and watching the slam poetry that you guys are doing this week and making the connections to modern things. Somebody made a connection to Logic's, one of Logic's songs. Great, do that, okay? That's when I'm asking for allusions, guys, it doesn't have to be an allusion to a great literary work from the 1800s, okay? It can be about a rap song, Tupac, whatever, okay? Make those connections because you're gonna see that these are like tropes. These are things that happen that we've been talking about since the 1800s. Someone said, or for themes, someone said you don't have to be defined by color, but I want to challenge that a little bit because Langston Hughes is defined by his color in that poem and seeing the world through his eyes and the color of his skin. And I do think that you were right, I don't remember who said that, that it is hopeful, okay, but I don't know that he's hopeful that he will experience it. I wonder if he's hopeful that maybe someday someone will experience it. Okay, a couple more notes that I have here on the poems. The Battle of the Landlord of also Hughes. Here's some things that everyone noticed, okay? Here's some themes or some theme topics that everyone noticed and social issues that everyone noticed. The social issues that everyone noticed, or that people noticed: justice system issues, housing issues, racism issues, class and wealth, class issues, the wealth versus poverty. You could even get into like capitalism type issues, okay? So all of these things could relate back to that poem. Some people said it happens to all races with landlords. Oh yeah, you're absolutely right. That's true. My question is, does it happen because of the color of your skin, or does it happen because of the economic issue, or things like that? So you want to look into that. How can we identify, this is a question that I have, just to pose for thought, with Battle of the Landlord. How can we identify similarity in feeling oppressed, but also acknowledge the differences in the reasoning for the oppression, okay? And honoring that. We may be able to empathize with the experience, but we may not be able to empathize with the reason for it. Tableau, moving on to Tableau by Countee Cullen. A lot of you guys talked about interracial relationships, about racism being learned, things like that, and I think that you could tie this to friendships and to romantic relationships. So that's something to look into. What does society say? I wrote that as a question, like, what does society say about these kids' relationship, even to this day? And then a lot of you guys talked about looking back at your childhood as an adult, and I thought that was pretty powerful. And when we have more knowledge, and those kids are completely oblivious to any issue that there may be, but then as we get older, we learn about the world, we learn about ourselves, and then what does that create in us? Caste, color, and denomination, looking at Dickinson. I just think it's so cool, and very few of you talked about her, which is okay, but I just think it's so cool that we can make connections from Dickinson in the 1800s to today's social issues, and I think that speaks volumes about the relevance of this literature that we're reading in the course. And so I want to reiterate, whether or not you like the poems or anything like that, do try to evaluate and analyze them for their relevance, and to understand why they would even be written. Someone talked about theme, and they said, it was clear Dickinson was saying that death shows no favor to anyone. Great theme. Now, the only thing I would ask, and it was in a reply, the only thing that I would ask in addition to that reply is just provide a quote from the poem, provide a line that backs up your analysis, because it's such good analysis, then you want to show us where she said that. And I just think the theme should almost include death as a character, right? She's writing about death as a character and what death wants. So what does that say about our society? So those are my thoughts on week 1's discussion forum, and I will do it again for week 2, after you guys have already finished and I've put in your grades. If you review your grades and you're confused as to why you have a certain grade, feel free to shoot me an email, and I'm happy to explain that. Especially if it's like a low grade and you're like, why is it so low? There may be that, like, a reply that you did that somehow I missed, because I'm not perfect. Okay, so I am human. So please don't be afraid to, shoot me an email and ask a question about it. And I will be checking in with you guys for week 3, and I hope you guys enjoy and learn a lot from each other in this week's discussion forum. Have a great week.